It's really just to emphasize a few key points about Rencap. I think we've shown a commitment of seriousness, as it were, to frontier and emerging markets as a whole, more than most people. And I think one of the first key points we'd like to stress is we are committed to both Nigeria, Africa as a continent, and the frontier market at large. Now, I think that's very important because there's a lot of volatility globally right now. Because what you find is a lot of these frontier markets where we operate, Nigeria, case in point, for example, are more commodity countries. So you have one cheap commodity that you produce, that you export, and that creates revenue and earnings for you. Now, what we've seen globally is China is slowing down, and China has been a big driver for commodity prices in the last, I'd say, 5 years. And what you've seen is the minute China slows down now for whatever reasons internally to them, you've seen that the rest of the world, particularly the emerging and frontier markets, almost catching cold as a result. On top of that, the US, which has been a very, very easy, dovish kind of monetary environment, because when the crash happened, what central bankers typically do is just flood the system with a lot of cash, so that there's a crash, but just throw cash and liquidity into the system, and that spurs economic activity. The US did that, and now they're about to start to rewind that cycle, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. But again, that's important because on top of what is happening in China, once the US starts to also raise these rates, then we might suffer, along with a few other countries that saw this liquidity at the time. Because once you ease that liquidity, there's capital, and everyone's asking, where does this capital go? And typically that capital leaves the shores of your borders and looks really globally for where to put this to work. We benefited from that as a country. You saw that whether through foreign direct investments, you saw that whether through portfolio inflows into the equity market, into the bond market. So the minute the US starts to raise these interest rates, you can naturally expect that those who benefited might suffer. So those are some macro headwinds to a place like Nigeria, and on top of that we've got our internal struggles or challenges, as it were, that I think we're all aware of. And you are seeing quite a few people shrink back from investments into the region for some of these reasons. I think case point number one for us is it's huge commitment for us, the big markets. We're here for the long haul. We are currently 3 African markets as a whole. So while we trade most African markets, we've got a very strong active presence in Nigeria, in South Africa, and in Kenya, from which we operate and service the region. So the first message really is that it's a long-term commitment for the firm. We're hiring people, we're strengthening, and just we continually think through ways through which we can better service the community. It's leadership. Leadership always is something I think as a vibrant firm you've got to always keep reevaluating yourself, as it were, and moving with the times. I think as a firm we have seen a need to just change sort of leadership type direction, leadership style, and that's what I think I bring to the table. Away from that, it is also a different way, I guess, of looking at problems. Like I mentioned to you as well, globally, you see a deviation from the traditional model, where what is your background, what is your experience, and you keep going with it. The problems that we face in Nigeria, whether it's the corporates, whether it's individuals, are no different from just what is being faced in the world globally now, which basically are more complex problems, which require different ways of thinking, different ways of strategizing. So I think from a high level, this is what will come hopefully with my presence at the firm. But on a more micro level, as to strategy, I'm sure some of them will probably interact with you as we go. What you will see for sure is volatility, not just in Nigeria, but globally. Because I think what the US Fed really didn't plan for, and all the time they have been saying was that increasing rates is China, and it's slow down there. Because if you go back and look at it, in the past, I'd say 7 years, since all the central bankers reduced interest rates to spoil the global economy, there's over a dozen of them who have actually said, no, you know what, it's time to start raising these rates. Because the way it works is once you ease the system, everything's going, and you start to get to bubble territory. Right? There's so much capital all over the place, buying property, real estate, assets, and there's too much money. Everything gets heated up. You're like, whoa, wait a minute, now we need to start slowing down. So what you do is you raise interest rates so that all that capital starts to leave the system. Over a dozen countries have tried to start to raise interest rates in the last 7 years. Every single one of them has had to do a U-turn. And they've done a U-turn because of events outside of their own hands, outside of their country. So Israel is a case in point, right? Interest rates were 0.5%, 0.4%. They thought a bubble was coming. They started to raise interest rates. All of a sudden now they went to 2.5 or thereabouts. Now they're back to 0.4%, 0.5% levels. Sweden is another notable example. Also thought there was a bubble brewing, started to raise interest rates, raised almost by 2.75% over time. Today it's negative interest rates. You actually have to pay to deposit money in Sweden. So you see a lot of countries that have tried to start raising rates, but then they find out that, whoa, okay, there's a recession in Greece. It's not my country, but I export to Greece. If there's a slowdown there, there's a slowdown in my country as well. Is it prudent to start raising interest rates? Let's do a U-turn. And I think the US now is sort of cutting between a rock and a hard place, because on one hand, you have your reputation at stake. As a central banker in the US, your reputation is really all you sell. Because the minute the market doesn't believe when you say something, you're almost in trouble. I think we saw a sign of that with the FX here in Nigeria. For example, where you get to the point where it's not necessarily about, is it right to do this or do that? It's a question of, do I believe what you said you will do as a governor? And if I do believe, then it's almost orderly. We all act orderly. What you don't want as a governor is people don't believe when you say you will do something. And then everyone starts to move in a different direction. So the US Fed on one hand has this reputation type thing to deal with. But then they have the reality of the markets as well to deal with, where people start to raise rates, it starts to hurt the economy, jobs start to get lost. Again, like we said, a lot of frontier markets tend to be just mono-commodity rich countries. In Nigeria's case, it's oil. Some other countries it's gold, it's cotton, whatever it is. Now, when you see what has happened globally, where China slows down, there's a big demand for these commodities, they don't need it anymore, prices crash, for example. What tends to happen, because if you think about it in real terms, as a nation, your GDP has taken a hit. Just the commodities down in half. This is what accounts for your revenues and income as a nation. Your GDP has taken a hit. Now, that impact shows itself in one or two ways. Sometimes you devalue the currency, so almost bring it to reality of where things are. And then you start building up again. Of course, that has negative consequences in countries that work because obvious reasons. It's a very import-driven country. And so inflation probably goes up on the back of that. Spain, people kind of shy away from that. The other route you could go is what it looks like we are going through now, which is leave the currency as it is. But what would ultimately happen is that the economy will take a hit. Okay? But without getting into a lot of the technicality, I think there are very simple ways to think through the problem. If the biggest argument for devaluation is that as a nation, once you put your budget down together, income versus expenses. Your income is down by X%. It's in dollars. Your expenses are in naira. So the easy way to think about it is, okay, you know what? This dollars, why doesn't it just mean more for me? Instead of 200, make it mean 230. So all of a sudden your expenditure naira is a lot more. It is a lot higher. That's argument number one. The other argument that people use to argue in favor of devaluation is as follows. Now, in the last, I'd say, 4 years or thereabouts, the naira was very stable, around 160 level, 170, before it jumped up to 197. Now, in that global environment of 0% interest rates, okay, what it means is a portfolio manager in the US could theoretically, and actually people did this a lot, you can take money in dollars at zero, okay? It's free money everywhere in the world, 0% interest rate. So you take that zero, you bring it to Nigeria, you invest, so let's assume $1. Take a dollar at zero from the US, bring it to Nigeria, you change it, let's say to 100 naira to a dollar. Now, you take this 100 naira, you put it in a bank in Nigeria. Interest rates in Nigeria are 16%, let's say. So your 100 naira becomes 116 at the end of a year, right? So technically, you now say you're done with this investment, you want to go back to your home country. That means you can take 116, change it back to dollars at 100, right? And you still have surplus. So you're up 16% even in dollar terms. Now, the theoretical laws of finance don't allow those sorts of things out. This is an arbitrage. That means you can do that all day long. So ideally, what you'll expect is $1 was 100 naira today. It became 116 in a year. The exchange rate for conversion at the end of a year should be 116 to a dollar, or maybe 115. So that when this man is done, 100 has become 116 at any bank, and is buying back the dollar. He's not buying at 100, he's buying at 116. It's depreciated about 16%. Those are the laws of interest rate parity, what you would expect. Now think of Nigeria for 4 years, staying flat at that rate. So you bought $100, change it to 100 naira, it became 116. You change that back to dollars at the same 100. You've done that for 4 years. People are saying, wait a minute, this should have gone from 100 to 116 to 124 to 132 to 145 in those 4 years. It remained at 100. It's theoretically overvalued. So a lot of these people that are arguing, and these are the sort of things that people look at the World Bank and a lot of foreign investors, that's the argument for the devaluation. I say all that to say this, how will the equity market react? I think we've already seen the reaction, okay? It wasn't good, so today the market is down 12-13% in the year to date. We saw the volatility that we saw until last week, heavy selling. I can tell you authoritatively, most foreign investors into Nigeria today are very, very underweight. I speak with people who have said, look, it doesn't look to me like Nigeria is ready anymore. When they're ready, you call me back, for example. And you hear people say they're selfish people or they're greedy people, they don't have their interests. I don't think we should go into that argument at this point. But what they have done is they have sold, they have taken their money, and they have said, look, we want some clarity around what you do on the currency, some clarity on the cabinet. And what would also, the final point is this is, there is a lot of foreign money that would like to come to work in Nigeria. Because the fundamentals really haven't changed. The demography story that people like, that brought them here, this is a lot of people, they must eat, they'll work, hopefully make money, spend, the economy grows, the infrastructural deficit. Everywhere you look, there is a story and a strong case for Nigeria. It really hasn't been stronger. What a lot of people also fear is, look, the naira is, let's call it 200 naira today. If I bring in $1 and change it to 200 naira today, and tomorrow the CBN will not change its course and says, okay, we'll devalue to 230. This gentleman has already lost 15% before even making any investments, before buying anything. He changed it at 200 naira to buy back that dollar is 230. So they're all afraid. Yes, we hear your CBN when they say they will devalue, but when the realities of life finally hits them and they have to devalue, you know what? It's not ready to take at this point, right? So those are some of the moving parts. So what I can tell you is this, is we have seen a lot of foreigners exit the market, especially on the equity side. There are still some of them that are in there because we have different bunches of foreign investors. You can't really bunch them all into one box. But for the most part, most of them have sold, most of them are very, very, very light.